You wake up early one Friday morning. You look down, you check at your phone to see the snow report for the coming weekend because you wanted to go up to the mountains to go skiing. Unfortunately, your phone says that the mountains will not be getting any snow this year. And after reading that, you realize that this has been Colorado's driest year in history. So you know that part of this is because of climate change, but you don't exactly know what climate change is. Well, you know what? Let's talk about the science behind that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists, and welcome on back to the Science Behind That podcast. I am your host, Atticus Hamilton, and as you heard in the intro, today we're going to be talking about something that is very interesting to any climate people out there, and to a lot of people, I think, which is climate change. And it's something that either does affect all of us now or will affect all of us really soon. But before we jump into today's episode, I just want to give a big thank you to everybody who is currently listening to my podcast. We, as a community, have reached a huge milestone in the past couple days. We have reached 900 listeners on my podcast, on this podcast. 900 of you, 900 unique people tune in every week to listen to the content that we produce here, and I'm very appreciative to every single one of you scientists out there, be it new, be them new, be them old. I'm very appreciative to every single one of you who listens to my podcast, who shares my podcast, and I'm really glad I can share the science of everyday life with all of you. Additionally, the big 1,000 is coming up. We only have around 98 more listeners to go before we hit the big 1,000 listeners listening to this podcast. And so, because of that, ladies and gentlemen, when we reach that 1,000, I'm going to do a very special episode called The Origin, the Beginning of the Science Behind That. So stay tuned for that. That is going to be a great episode, and I'm just going to give you a sneak peek now. Make sure to listen to that while you're not at work or not in front of your young kids or your family. That is an not safe for work episode. It'll be hilarious. It'll be a fun episode, so stay tuned for that. So jumping into today's episode, one more thing though, really quick before we do that, I want to invite all of you to go grab yourself a nice steaming hot cup of coffee, add a little bit of maple syrup in it. I have one right here next to my daily planner, which I recently got so I can keep up with a regular schedule of episodes. So let's jump right in. So climate change is, in of itself, it's not something caused by humans. There's two different types of climate change, and we're going to talk about that today. There's normal, I guess, environmental climate change, which is the overall fluctuations of the Earth's climate over thousands of years. And that's normal, like climatic shifts that we can see in things like ice cores. And then you have something called anthropogenic climate change, which is climate change as a direct result of human interaction. And before we get too farther into this, let me quickly define an important term for you guys. Anthropogenic, when we use it to say anthropogenic carbon or anthropogenic climate change, all it means is it's climate change or carbon dioxide that is either produced by or created by or influenced by humans, right? So anthropogenic carbon is the carbon dioxide produced when you drive your car, right? It's the carbon dioxide produced from the coal-fired power plants. It's everything that is directly produced by humans. And then anthropogenic climate change is the climate change as a result of our introduction of a superfluous amount of carbon dioxide into Earth's atmosphere. So now that we understand that, I think the next course of action here is to kind of clear up a misunderstanding about climate change. And this will lead us into our next section. Climate change does not mean that every place on Earth will get hotter. Now, for all of you veteran scientists out there who've listened to my podcast for a very long time, you guys will probably know that we talk about every science-based topic on this podcast, and sometimes politics gets into play. A couple years ago, for all my American viewers out there, or listeners out there, a couple years ago there was a Republican senator who went into Congress during a congressional meeting about the budget, that current year's budget for climate resolution. And he went into the congressional floor, ladies and gentlemen, with a cooler. And in the cooler, he pulled out a snowball. And his argument was, well, it's snowing outside, so climate change doesn't exist. This is a common misconception that I see everywhere. Sorry, I had to take a sip of my coffee there. This is a common misconception that I see everywhere. And it's this idea that with climate change, everywhere on Earth gets hotter, which comes from the fact that as we pump more carbon dioxide into Earth's atmospheres, global temperatures on average rise, right? And we don't really want to surpass 2 degrees centigrade for a temperature increase. But what does that actually mean on a more localized scale? It essentially means that extreme climates become more extreme. So let me give you an example. California is a really dry place for any of you who have never been to California. Now, along the coastline, obviously, it's more wet, but the interior of the state is really, really dry. That is more of an extreme climate. And so as Earth's global temperatures rise due to climate change, right? As Earth's temperatures rise, what will happen is the seasons in California, for example, will become more extreme. Hotter summers, colder or heavier rainfall winters. But overall, the overall climatic shift in California would shift towards a hotter, drier climate. Alaska, where I spent some time living not too long ago, Alaska is a really interesting state because where I used to live, the summers would never get above 70, really, and the winters, the average winter temperature would be negative 19. But if you go into interior Alaska, the summer temperatures are upwards of 100, and the winter temperatures are downwards of negative 50. That is an extreme climate. So if we look at climate change then in Alaska, what would happen is you would have even colder winters and even hotter summers in the interior. Now, the coastal areas would just experience a generalized increase. And so what is the trend here, ladies and gentlemen? The trend here is two things. Number one is that extreme climates become more extreme, right? Harsher winters, hotter summers. And places that are, generally speaking, not along a coastline, become more extreme as well. The exception being California. But with California, majority of the people live in the interior part of the state. And any moisture that goes along the coast is blocked by the Sierra Nevada mountains as it tries to get into the inside of the state. And why do places that are by coastlines tend to not see these big swings? The simple reason is because along the coastline you have the ocean to regulate the temperature. But even still, again, California, Alaska, all these places are still extreme climatic areas, And as Earth's global temperatures rise, you get more extreme seasons. So ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is not per se, it's not everywhere gets hotter. It is the seasons get more extreme, which is why with human-induced climate change and just climate change in general, we see more hurricanes, right? We see more tropical storms. We see more tornadoes. Weather patterns just get bigger. They get more extreme. And so that's one part of climate change. And again, this is a very big, broad area. And that I think is the part that most people are familiar with is how does it impact the weather? But another consequence of climate change is what happens to the oceans. And it's an area of the science of climate change that is rarely talked about, but is extremely important. So ladies and gentlemen, let us go through this really quick. So within the oceans, there are global current systems. And I'm sure all of you know what a current is. It is a rapid flow of water. Generally, it's either governed by temperature differences or density differences, right? And those density differences could be due to temperature or to salinity. There is one current in particular which is vital for the entire climate of Europe, which is the Gulf Stream. Now, the Gulf Stream, you'll hear people say it starts in the Gulf of Mexico, which is actually inaccurate. It starts along the coast of Brazil and the eastern coast of Argentina, right? And it goes all the way up from there into the Gulf of Mexico where it gets heated. And so you have this hot ball of water basically in the Gulf of Mexico that then flows across the Atlantic northwards. And that warm water from the Gulf Stream bathes Western Europe in warm water. So the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Portugal, that entire region of Europe is bathed in warm water from the Gulf Stream. And so what you may be saying is, well, what does that have anything to do with anything, Atticus? That's really important, because that is why the climate of Europe is relatively mild. Now, a couple thousand years ago, we saw the Gulf Stream shut off. And when it shut off, that plunged Europe into the last ice age. And the reason this is the case is because that hot water, that warm water from the Gulf Stream, is contrasting basically with the cold surrounding water of the North Atlantic. And basically what happens is it increases the rate of evaporation, and that increases the formation of cloud cover and of storms. That's why England is always so gray and rainy. Which is exactly the same reason why, for my American viewers, why San Francisco is always so cloudy, because San Francisco is bathed in warm water from the Peruvian current. And the Peruvian current comes up again from the western coast of Chile. It comes up from the coast of Chile all the way up into California, and it bathes San Francisco in particular with warm water, which then contrasts with the cold surrounding Pacific. And again, you get this formation of storm clouds and basically temperature regulation systems. And so as the Earth warms, this is the important distinction, ladies and gentlemen. As the Earth warms, it's not that every area on Earth gets hotter. It's two things. It's that extreme climates get more extreme, and seasons generally get more extreme. And the oceans universally get warmer. So the land doesn't universally get warmer. The oceans get universally warmer. And the reason that is because water has the second highest heat capacity out of any liquid substance. The first is ammonia. if Earth had liquid ocean or oceans of liquid ammonia, man, we wouldn't really have this issue because that would just absorb so much heat. But we don't. We have oceans of liquid water, which is the second best heat absorber, I guess. Heat capacity fluid. And so basically, the hotter Earth gets, the warmer the oceans get. And the Gulf Stream, along with the entire global ocean conveyor belt, which is a term for the united circulation of current systems in the world's oceans, if the oceans get too warm, you run the risk of those currents shutting off. Because long story short, the way they work is cold water in the Arctic and the Antarctic is denser than warm water. So as northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere currents, warm water currents, flow near the surface of the water in the Arctic and Antarctic, they get cold and they sink to the bottom. And when they sink to the bottom, they displace a warm layer of water up to the surface. And that causes that flow of water southward if you're in the northern hemisphere, or northward if you're in the southern hemisphere, where it gets heated and then so on and so forth. It cools once it's back at the poles and sinks. That's the same thing that's going on with the Gulf Stream, right? The Gulf Stream is governed by this temperature difference. And this temperature difference in oceanography we call a thermocline. And the risk you run here is if the oceans heat up too much, the thermocline would not be significant enough to perpetuate this fluctuation in global Earth's current systems, and you run the risk of them shutting off. Now, historically in the past, anytime these global ocean conveyor belts shut off, it plunges the planet into an ice age. But that wouldn't happen in this case because there's so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If I remember correctly, it's around 700 metric tons every year. There's so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that it would still keep the planet warm. And the result would be a very warm planet with very few places that have temperate climate. All of Europe would be dry. It'd be very, very dry because it wouldn't be bathed in warm water from the Gulf Stream. And it would be a planet with very, very extreme seasons and weather conditions. So would you still get snow? Absolutely. But your winter storms would be as wacky and as extreme as your summer temperatures would be. And all the places, for example, again, for my Western listeners, for my American listeners, all the places in the Western United States, they would be very, very dry. I recently read a paper published on NCBI, and it was talking about how by the year 2060, Colorado may be facing snowless winters, except for in the high country. And that's kind of a scary thought to me, because the question here isn't will humanity be destroyed by this? The question here is, how will the world change as it heats up? Because I rarely make these episodes a political statement, and I don't want you to think that I'm doing that. But ladies and gentlemen, anthropogenic climate change is a real threat to humanity. And it's not a threat on a scale of 1,000 years, it's on a scale of 50 years, 60 years. And it's easy for people to say, I don't have to worry about it, because in 60 years' time, I'll be on my way out. One, our medicine is advancing at such a fast rate, I doubt that. And two, it's less of a question about yourself and more of a question about how this will impact the entire planet. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope it was informative. This is a topic that definitely has a special place to me because of my love of the oceans and climate change. At least 70% of it is the oceans, because the oceans cover over 70% of the Earth's surface. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you guys on Monday. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. And until then, remember, stand up and question everything.